Top 25, presented by Chick-fil-A.
1 week from tonight, teams will be placed in the starting blocks with the first release of the official college football playoff rankings. And when that happens, the marathon that is the season turns into a sprint to the finish line and selection day. Last couple of weeks, number 2 has been a danger spot, and number 2 Clemson is on the road again this week. So time is starting to draw closer. The upsets are looming. We'll talk about who should be in, at least for now. And that crazy night in West Lafayette will have an impact on what the 13 people who gather next week in Grapevine, Texas will decide inside that room. Next week, the official college football rankings come out. We will not see them until you do. Glad to have you with us. College Football Playoff Top 25. Reese Davis, Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollack, Joey Galloway, and Jesse Palmer. And guys, we start with Ohio State. The Buckeyes were sitting at number 2. They got blown out at Purdue. Kirk, I'll start with you. Now look, from a mathematical standpoint, Ohio State has everything in front of them. They can still win out, win the Big Ten, and be in position to make the playoff. But what did last Saturday night do to your perception of the Buckeyes?
Well, it's very different from a year ago when they went up after a big win against Penn State and got blown out by Iowa, and that eventually provided an anchor for them to keep them out. This is even worse because forget the playoffs. This team just needs to work on blocking and tackling. The playoffs and winning the Big Ten should be the last thing that they are concerned about during a bye week. The defensive issues at linebacker and safety continue. It was not just in the Purdue game. It's been going on really since the TCU game. It finally caught up to them in this game. The offensive line is an issue. They're one-dimensional on their offense, just throwing the ball, not even trying to run the football. So I think before they worry about what do we have to do to get back in the playoff, I think it's more about we got to find an identity on offense, and we got to try to figure out some errors on defense before they get ready for Nebraska and Michigan State, Maryland, and Michigan. So I know it's easy to try to want to put them, how do they fit in the playoff race, but to me, their issues are much, much larger than just trying to get back into the playoff race, Joey.
Yeah, and the one thing I've learned, Herb, through all my years of playing football is football don't lie. If you have issues, eventually you will come up against somebody that will exploit those issues and make those a problem for you. This defense, and Jesse has been talking about it all year long. He's been keeping his notepad and writing down all the big plays they've given up. And that started with Oregon State to begin the season. And it's always been every game there's issues, there's big plays here and there. And so when you play football, in your season, eventually you come up against a team that can exploit those problems on a night where you can't cover them up. Because you can mask some of these issues. You can mask them when you play against a team like TCU who had big plays, but you found some defensive plays, some defensive touchdowns to overcome the problems. And then you come up against a Purdue team who is ready to roll. They get these big plays, and offensively you're not clicking. And any time an Ohio State team plays against Purdue and they throw the ball 73 times and they run it 25 times, I believe. That alone, if you look at that stat line alone, you know that there is a problem in a football game, and Purdue was flat out the better team that night.
And Joey, you know it's a big notebook. I mean, I write in that thing weekly.
Oh, yes.
I mean, my hand is getting sore from it. Yeah, you're right.
Still writing, though.
It's not legible. It's not legible necessarily. It's like Aramaic, but it is neat. To your guys' point, I just think finally Ohio State's Achilles heel came back to bite them, and you guys mentioned it: lack of speed at linebacker and safety, bad tackling, and too many explosive plays. I think my biggest takeaway is that it's just a constant reminder to everybody that in college football, chaos seems to loom when and where we least expect it. And I think at the start of the year, when we look at matchups all across the board, we circle games like LSU, Alabama, and Ohio State, Michigan. Where can teams trip up? And it ends up happening in West Lafayette on a Saturday night in late October. I think it's a good message for all these teams out there, especially highly ranked ones. If you are very highly ranked at this point of the season, you are going to get everybody's best punch. Regardless of who you're playing, you're taking somebody else's A game. And it's a big reason why I have so much respect for coaches like Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney, and what they've been able to do these last several years. Just models of consistency, bringing their A game to the park week in, week out, and finding ways to win. And it's an example why, as we look and we talk later, David, about Notre Dame and Clemson and what they have left on their schedule, I know the numbers and the percentages say they have a great chance to win out, but nobody's safe. You have a high standard. You got to play your best game every week or you will get beat.
I think this game is bigger. This Ohio State thing is bigger than just this game, too. I mean, the Iowa 30-point loss, this 30-point loss, the 31-point loss against Clemson in the playoff. Like, something's been missing from this team for several years, and it hasn't been talent. And that's, I think, if you're an Ohio State fan, that's what you're most frustrated about. And they got to figure out what that is. And Kirk mentioned the bye week, and they got to figure out how to run the football more effectively, be more physical, limit big plays. But it's been a trend, not just this year, the last several years from Ohio State. They've had these games where, stretches in the season where they just look really, really, really bad and underperform for the talent they have.
Kirk?
One last thing, Reese, I was going to say, David's dead on, and I would add to that. When they lost last year to Iowa, there was J.T. Barrett and Billy Price and some other leaders on defense that could step up in front of that room without the coaches and really get the players' attention because they had been there and done that and been through the wars. This is still a relatively young team in some key areas. And who's going to step up? Is it Isaiah Prince, who's kind of struggling right now himself? Is it the wide receiver group? Who has that kind of that alpha personality to be able to try to get this team's attention? Because I think one of the things that gets overlooked with J.T. Barrett, as we look at the numbers just on paper with Dwayne Haskins, look at these huge numbers, he's a Heisman guy, is his personality is not J.T. Barrett's. It's not the norm for him to lead. He's going to be who he is. And I just wonder, Reese, if the players have that guy that can step up and really get the rest of the team's attention and respect.
And, Kirk, there have been reports that there's some tension on the coaching staff. Urban Meyer denied that this week and said he called it urgency instead, and they'll need it. Now, one thing Ohio State has been very consistent in is their ability to beat Michigan. But while the Buckeyes seem to be working through some problems, Michigan seems to be getting better and better. You got the rivalry win finally against Michigan State. David, I'm not going to say it's clear that Michigan has the best chance probably for the Big Ten. I would say Michigan is the best team, not the most talented team. That's still Ohio State. But the best team in the Big Ten right now is Michigan. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, and it's an attack defensively every week. I mean, no Gary, no problem. And you just watch them play, and that's one thing they're always going to be consistent. They're not going to go and get 49 dropped on them by anybody, especially Purdue or anybody else in the country. So I think they are consistent. I think they know who they are this year. I think you start to see the offense is still a work in progress, and I don't think it's an explosive offense, but they're going to run the football a lot. Higdon's going to get 30, 40 carries a game if he needs to, and they're going to use formations, and Shea Patterson's going to run it. But that defense, man, it's legit, and it's one of the best in football, and they'll be in every game. So I agree with you. I think they're the team in the Big Ten. They might be the only team in the Big Ten that has a chance to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree too, David. I think that's the biggest difference right now. Michigan plays playoff caliber defense, and Ohio State right now is just getting gashed. If Urban Meyer and Greg Schiano and this coaching staff and the leaders, like Kirk was just talking about, can find a way to rally, and if they can beat Michigan late in the regular season at home, and who knows, they might get a rematch with Purdue in the Big Ten title game. If they could exact revenge in that game, obviously that would go a long way in the eyes of the committee. Obviously, as we've said, that's a long way from happening right now. There are glaring weaknesses right now, but I think obviously the winner of Michigan-Ohio State, if that team were to finish with one loss and win the Big Ten, that's a team that I think is obviously a great shot of reaching the playoff.
And Michigan's definitely playing better football right now than Ohio State. The only difference is if you look at the rest of their schedule, Ohio State has to go to Michigan State, but then they get Michigan at home. And whereas Michigan has to go through Penn State, and then they have to travel to Columbus. And I think that is a little bit of difference maker if both teams get to that final weekend in November and have to face each other in Columbus, Ohio. Now, Karan Higdon has I believe 6 straight 100-yard rushing games. You guys talked about the defense. You look at this Michigan team, if they continue to run the football, and running is the key in the Jim Harbaugh style of offense, and we see Shea Patterson look more and more comfortable, and it's so much easier for a quarterback to get comfortable when you have a run game and a running back that is carrying it 20-some times a game and getting you 100 yards. It keeps the clock rolling. Your defense comes on the field and they hold a team like Michigan State to under 100 yards total offense. So the recipe for what Michigan wants to do on the football field is in place, and they look terrific athletic at doing it. They look great against Wisconsin. They did the same thing against Michigan State in bad weather. So if they can continue that and get Ohio State in one of those types of games where it is a hard-nosed, 3 yards cloud of dust kind of game, which we've seen in the past, Michigan definitely has the advantage in that situation. Resume-wise, they went out. Their loss to Notre Dame early in the season is looking really good right now because Notre Dame is an undefeated team in the top 3 or 4 teams. So Michigan's sitting right there. They went out, they get in.
Joey, what I love about Michigan is they're ticked off. They have some leaders like Chase Winovich, and they're calling it a revenge tour. It started with Wisconsin. They got a piece of Michigan State and East Lansing. Penn State's next on the list. Ohio State at the end of the year. And we might just have fun with that. Winovich, he's a crazy character. Look at him with the hair. But they really, behind closed doors, they really buy into that. They really are on a mission. So things change. Jesse talked about that in his opening statement. Ohio State could rebound and become a different team during their bye week, but if they continue along the pace, not just the Purdue game, but the last 3 or 4 games defensively and offensively be one-dimensional, they will have a very, very tough time, whether it's home or away, matching up with Michigan the way Michigan's playing right now. So Ohio State's got to get a lot better before they worry about trying to deal with that Michigan team, because they have an identity on offense right now with the way they're running the football. And Joey, you're right. It's fun to watch Shea Patterson just settle in, make a few plays, and remember, Tariq Black, any moment now could come back. That's like picking up a free agent in the middle of the year. That would be huge to go along with what they're doing on the outside with the receivers that they already have.
You know, he actually stepped on the field Saturday against Michigan State, and then there was a timeout or something. He stepped back. So he hasn't gotten in the game yet, but you know it's coming at any minute. There's another one-loss team in the Big Ten in Iowa. A few years ago, I think all of us questioned. I think this Iowa team is better than that team that went to the Big Ten championship game. Should they keep winning, maybe they're in the mix. But I think what is more likely in this conference now is that you could emerge with a 2-loss Big Ten champion. And if you do, Jesse, what are the chances that the Big Ten, again, misses the playoff because you wind up – I mean, look, Michigan could dump another game and then still win and win the league, or maybe Iowa loses and wins the Big Ten championship game. If you have a 2-loss Big Ten champion and no 1-loss team in the Big Ten, do they miss a playoff again?
Yeah, I don't think a 2-loss Big Ten champion gets in. I think one of the worst scenarios for the Big Ten potentially is even if, Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame finish undefeated, and there's a 1-loss Big Ten champion, maybe now, and you're comparing that with a 1-loss Big 12 champion. I think that's probably the biggest nightmare scenario I can imagine for the Big Ten now, and whether Texas out in the Big 12 beats a 1-loss Oklahoma, highly ranked Oklahoma team again, or if Oklahoma, exacts revenge on Texas in that Big 12 title game. I think if it was Michigan or Ohio State with 1 loss at the end of the year, I think with their resume and who they would have beaten, I think that'd stack up pretty strongly. I think that scenario to me, I don't think a 2-loss team from the Big Ten gets in, but I think if Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame win out, I think that potentially spells trouble for the Big Ten champion if there's a 1-loss Big 12 champion at the end of the year.
Yeah, Jesse, I think the Big Ten, if they're keeping score at home, they need to be keeping an eye on Notre Dame. If Notre Dame wins out and they're in, obviously 2 of the Power 5 conference champions are going to be left out. And I think that's where the Big Ten could be in trouble. Michigan, to me, is the only team, as we sit here near Halloween, that has an opportunity to run the table and possibly get in over a Texas or over an Oklahoma, depending on who comes out of the Big 12. I think it's going to be very hard for Ohio State after that performance against Purdue, unless they have style points, unless they not only win, but they look dominating doing it. That might catch the committee's attention. But, David, I think it'd be hard for Ohio State, possibly, even if they were to win out, to leapfrog over top of a team like Oklahoma or Texas if one of those 2 teams runs the table.
Well, and especially because we're talking about Michigan a lot, because I think we think they're the strongest contender in the Big Ten. They already lost to Notre Dame. So Notre Dame, I mean, theoretically, you could say Notre Dame would have to dump 2 games to get to that point, because Notre Dame has the head-to-head over Michigan already. So, I think they could be in trouble, and it's very strange. We talked about at the beginning of the season, the Big Ten could be a team or a conference that could get 2 teams in the playoff, and now you look at them and they're fighting right now. Who's the contender? And outside of Michigan, are we finding one? Maybe with Ohio State and Penn State with 2 losses already, maybe they can play spoiler and beat Michigan. But it's definitely looking more like 0 as opposed to when we were thinking in the season where we were debating whether it could be 2. It's closer to 0 than it is to 2.
And I'd agree with you, David, when you look at it, and once you start saying jumping teams, and Ohio State would be in a position, and we haven't seen the rankings and how they shake out next Tuesday, but Ohio State would be in a position where they might have to jump over teams like Oklahoma, teams like Texas, if they can come out with just the one loss. Ohio State, and we have the same sort of kind of conversation we had last year, it was the Iowa loss and the way they lost to Iowa. And that's why the Purdue would be the same sort of conversation. They got blown out. They didn't just lose the game, they got blown out and look bad while they're doing it. And so when the committee gets there and we're sitting there on that final Sunday and Reese is picking on me like he always does, the Ohio State team, I'm just saying the Ohio State team would have trouble jumping over someone, but Michigan's in a position to get there for sure.
Hey, Joey, during the break, can you go on social media and give us a good rant about how you feel about teams jumping over teams, whether they win or lose? You don't like
Reese,
that. You get very upset about that.
I'm saving that for later, Reese. Don't get me going in the A's. I'm saving that for later on.
I got a little something that'll get you going a little bit later on. First of all you fellas, stop sleeping on the Hawkeyes. I'm not saying they will win out. If they do, they're going to have a lot on the resume. They've got to,
love that.
Man, they've got they've got a really good non-conference win. They got a great non-conference win against Iowa State.
The guy above me will go nuts if you start talking about Iowa. Watch your step, because he still brings up. It was 4 years ago when I talked about Iowa, and this guy still brings it up today.
I didn't like Iowa 4 years ago. I like him this year. I like him this year.
I agree.
Again,
it's better.
Joey, this is why I give Herbie more latitude right there, because I didn't like Iowa, and what was that, 15, I think, either, at least in terms of being a playoff team.
Yeah.
I'm more open to it.
Hey,
this is a better team.
It's just like an undefeated Washington State from last year.
I like how you guys put.
I'm just saying.
You got to watch what Joey
State,
he'll just slide some words right into your mouth.
Well,
He'll just put them right into your mouth for you.
Washington State was undefeated last year, and I tried to tiptoe in here and slide them into the conversation, and Reese and Kirk took a baseball bat to my kneecaps. Now, last week, Washington State with one loss, Reese throws them in there like, hey, what about Washington State?
Every year's a little different, Joey. The teams are different. You seen that Wazoo defense? It's not bad. Not bad. Not bad. We'll talk Pac-12 a little bit later on, and something else might get guys going. Instead of who's in, who's out, who's more likely to be out, Alabama or Clemson? I know you're thinking neither, but you had to choose one. And do the Irish have to be perfect? Will they need luck? What if they came down against another one-loss team? We'll evaluate resumes when you come back.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Chick-fil-A Nuggets. Tonight is Nugget Night.
Alabama's the clear number one.
Clemson at number 2.
The chaos is just starting.
What a night in West Lafayette.
Notre Dame's got the next best resume.
Michigan and LSU are legit.
The first rankings reveal October 30th, 7 p.m. on ESPN. So that means this is the last week that the AP Top 10 will be the defining ranking system. The AP Top 10 brought to you by Chick-fil-A. Alabama sitting at number 1. They have the week off. In fact, 3 of the top 5 teams in the country and UCF at number 10 all have this week off as we head toward November, which is not too far away. Alabama and Clemson sitting at the top spot. That's been very familiar during this playoff era. David, though, if you had to choose, who is more likely to miss the playoff, Alabama or Clemson?
And neither's not an option, you said?
Well, okay. I mean, I think everybody's going to say the most likely thing is neither. But if you had to choose, who would be in more danger in your judgment?
I would say Alabama. And I know that sounds crazy because we've kind of talked about how they're the best team on the planet. But I also think that injuries are starting to be significant a little bit, too. Jalen Hurts now has surgery. I'm not saying Tua's hurt, but he's a little bit banged up with his knee, and you've seen him just by sliding off the field, making him a little bit more vulnerable. And let's couple that with the fact, too, guys, that they got to play LSU in a couple weeks. They've got to play an SEC champ, whether it be Florida or Georgia. In the end, that could be another tough game. So I think their road is obviously a lot tougher to get there, and with some injuries mounting, we got to look out for Alabama.
Yeah, David, this is a tough one, and I've been thinking about this one a lot and batting it around. It is just tough. It is really tough to think that Alabama won't get in. I mean, even if they drop a game, injuries could mount up. We saw that last season. They caught some injuries to linebacker by the end of the season and looked like themselves. They got healthy by the time they got to the playoff, and then they were absolutely fine. Clemson, because we've seen them drop a game to Syracuse last year, which they should not have done. We've seen them play close games. They go to Florida State, coming up their next game. And so I'm just going to say Clemson because I just can't wrap my brain around the Alabama team that looks like they should possibly be playing against the Cincinnati Bengals some weekends. I can't see them not getting in. What do you got, Kirk?
You've been really batting this one around, huh? Really thinking this one over.
I've been thinking about this one.
Yeah, about 60 seconds, Kirk. He's been on it.
I tell you what, man. What is this, week 3 or 4? We've been doing this ranking show
12.
Before we actually have rankings. We're really running out of topics when this is one of our top topics. And option C is not none of the above. I don't know. I'll say Alabama because they have to, like David said, they got to go to Baton Rouge without Devin White, which was the worst call I've ever seen in my life. Can we do a segment on that since we're looking for things to talk about? That targeting call, can we revisit that?
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to disagree with you slightly, but then offer this. I think by the letter of the law it was the right call. But I think that rule needs some more latitude for a little more judgment because it was not a severe hit and therefore didn't warrant the penalty that he received. How about that?
Letter of the law means that he hits him in the face. He hit him in the top of the chest.
Kirk, he launched, pushed,
top of the
crown
chest.
of the helmet, made contact with the head.
I broke this down all day today.
It just did.
You're disagreeing with Dave Kataya, who's official. I mean, Dave Kataya always protects the officials, so I don't think it's by the letter of the law. The letter of the law means you got to hit me in the face. And you're talking about the second half of a game that's going to cost this dude the first half of the Alabama game. The replay guys have got to say it's so obvious and blatant. Then they make the call. It's a roughing the passer, take off the targeting, 15 yards, keep him in the game. He doesn't miss the Alabama game.
And that's
awful call. That was terrible.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the rule needs some more latitude for just what you're talking about. That did not warrant, the severity of the hit did not warrant an ejection. But I'm going to give you one other thing here. Yeah. Let's go to Notre Dame and talk about the Fighting Irish now as we start our blimp-worthy debate brought to you by Goodyear now. The Fighting Irish, undefeated. They've gotten through midterms now. Now they play Navy. They're going to have to travel a lot in the latter portion of the season. Jesse, does Notre Dame have to stay perfect to get into the college football playoff?
No, they don't. But before I get into it, I want to say, first off, Kirk, phenomenal job just derailing that conversation completely 90 degrees and getting us off something we've been talking about. Very well done. Woo! Joey was thinking hard and long about it during softball practice and his kids' flag football games.
Oh, yeah.
Alabama, Clemson, who's not going to make it in? So back to Notre Dame. I don't think Notre Dame has to go undefeated to make it into the playoff. I just think their resume is too strong. I think if they even end up with one loss, the strength of schedule is something I think we all have to respect. No FCS opponents, 10 Power 5 opponents, and especially I think if we look at what's coming up and not necessarily who they're playing, but where they have to travel. They're going to go play Navy in San Diego. They've got Syracuse in New York City. They'll go to Northwestern. They got to go all the way back out to the West Coast and beat USC. That's just brutal. And I think then you look at the resume, and if Michigan ends up, winning out like a lot of us think they will and finish with one loss at the end of the year, that could be the best win of the entire college football regular season. Extremely impressive. I think we don't know how it's going to end. There is a possibility for Notre Dame at the end of the year that they have 3 wins against Power 5 champions. If Virginia Tech won the ACC, if Stanford or USC won the Pac-12, and of course Michigan won the Big Ten. I mean, even with one loss, I think Notre Dame's resume is way too strong. And obviously, I think they pass the eye test week in, week out, David, to leave them out if they only have one loss.
Well, and I think we keep talking strongly about Michigan, too. They beat Michigan. If there's any kind of dispute with one losses, obviously they're going to get in. But I tell you, I think that, it's interesting. I think we saw last year that the committee said, I think this team's better than that. And if you make an argument for Notre Dame down the stretch, and that's what I want to see with the committee in the future is who's the best team. Let's see how Notre Dame plays because I think there's a good chance you're going to see a Notre Dame loss coming up in the future. I think they are sputtering a little bit. I think it's going to be interesting to watch them if they can navigate that schedule down the stretch. But, it's just going to be who you're matched up with. That's what we got to see down the stretch. If it's Michigan, they're good because they already beat Michigan. That's a huge feather in their cap. And I think the number one one of the number one opponents they have against them, not playing, but that they'll be measured against.
And so as we look at this Notre Dame team, and Jess, you talk about their resume, I don't get as excited about a Stanford win because Stanford doesn't look like the team we thought they would be. I believe Notre Dame needs to go undefeated to close the door and just stay out of a conversation and a matchup against other teams that have one loss. I think if Notre Dame should happen to lose, and then you start to bring in whether it is a Michigan team with one loss or a Texas team or Oklahoma team with one loss, a LSU team or a UCF team who is undefeated, I think it just opens the door for Notre Dame to get left out if they lose a game. Now, as you look at their schedule, you say they should win out for sure. It sort of adds to that. If you're going to say they should win out, if they drop one of those games, I think it hurts. And the way they drop the game will also matter.
Yeah, Joey.
If I were Notre Dame and Brian Kelly.
Go ahead, Kirk. Go ahead.
Go ahead, David. No, I was just going to say, if I were Brian Kelly, I'm with Joey. I would not want to be in any of those arguments. I would want to just win out, obviously, and be in a really good position. If they lose and they're not a conference champion, you know, that opens up arguments and potentially they're hanging their hat on that strength of schedule and hopefully that would outweigh against another one-loss team. And as David said, if it's up against Michigan, you know, they beat Michigan head-to-head, that would help them. But I don't think that's a slippery slope, in my opinion, if they lose a game, David. I think they need to win out and stay out of any of these discussions because of lack of conference championship.
I hear you, and I understand that, but obviously with the win against Michigan, and think about, like, you look at the Buckeyes, obviously they're going to be there in the end, and you start comparing loss for loss. The Buckeyes, when you lose by 30, and if Notre Dame has a game that's pretty close, because we're not going to see. First of all, we're not going to see that from Notre Dame. They're not going to get blown out. I think it's going to be an interesting debate because again, it's who have you beaten, it's how do you look, and then who did you lose to? That's going to be part of the equation in all this. So when you lose to a bad team or when you get stomped out, like Ohio State did to a decent team, to a pretty good Purdue team, and then you beat Michigan already, I think Notre Dame's already got some matchups that are very favorable for them.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it is imperative the committee needs to, and they will, and they have, watched how teams play. And, you know, as far as Notre Dame not winning a conference championship, remember the last two college football playoff seasons have had teams that were not conference champions. Now, they were members of conferences, so that makes it a little different, but Notre Dame has that opportunity. We'll continue here on College Football Playoff, Top 25. Waving that Pac-12 flag, are we down to Washington State, or is that conference already all but eliminated? Game in Pullman, Washington State against Oregon. They capped off a terrific day there by beating the Ducks 34-20. They came out on fire in the first half, built a big lead. Oregon came roaring back, and then a clutch drive by Gardner Minshew and some gutsy calls by Leach, and the mustache moves on. And now Wazoo is the last remaining hope of the Pac-12 to have a one-loss conference champion, and as a result, ESPN's playoff predictor says there is but a 6% chance of a Pac-12 team making the college football playoff. And interestingly enough, Washington still has a better shot than Washington State, at least according to the playoff predictor. Joey, is the Pac-12 for all practical purposes done?
Well, I wouldn't say they're mathematically done because they still have a chance. And dare I say, Washington State, like I said last year, has the best chance in the Pac-12 of getting there if they can knock off Washington, now that they have a win like Oregon on their resume. And then once they get to the Pac-12 championship, whoever comes out of the South will matter. If one of those teams can win out the rest of their games and become a ranked football team, Washington State has a chance, but they're going to need some help. And just like I tell you guys every single season we have these conversations, there's going to be some teams lose some games. You guys keep acting like people will go undefeated, and I keep saying that, hey, there's going to be some losses coming ahead of us,
I think
guys.
Joey picked there to be 10 undefeated teams at the end.
How
of the
many
year,
undefeated did you have, Joey? 4?
I'm telling you guys now, and I'm going to say this for next year when Reese sets me up, there's going to be some teams lose. I refuse to ever take that bait again. Everyone's going to lose games. Washington State still has a chance.
I don't even know who you are anymore.
I'm not going to bite anymore, Reese. I promise you, never
Reese
biting
is giving
again.
you stank face. I mean, he's looking right down on your bottom left.
He sets me up every year with that.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree wholeheartedly with you, by the way, that mathematically I think Washington State still has a chance with the Washington game at the end of the season. Still got Colorado. They still got plenty of tests with them. I mean, Stanford this week, Colorado, and then Washington at the end of the season. Washington State's not out of it. I just don't think they're a team that can run the table. I think they're really, really good. I think they caught Oregon at a perfect time with Oregon's injuries and being banged up, and they took advantage of it early, especially with that offensive line for Oregon, and got after them. I just don't think Washington State's a team that's going to get there, and because of that, I think the Pac-12 in the end will be left out.
Yeah, I do too, David. And I think the biggest issue for Washington State is non-conference schedule. They've beaten Wyoming, San Jose State, and Eastern Washington. So if they do win out and they finish with one loss, I just think from a resume perspective, I don't think it's going to stack up very strong against other one-loss champions from Power 5 play. We talked about this last week. I personally wonder if the committee would show leniency for their loss at USC based on how poorly that game was refereed. But at the end of the day, look, I mean, if Washington's going to make a statement, it has to happen now. Joey alluded to it. They've got Stanford, Washington. They need Utah to keep winning. And if you've watched Utah the last couple of weeks, when Tyler Huntley's playing good, they're legit. With their defense, when Huntley's playing as well as he's playing at quarterback, that's a dangerous team. But I think for Washington State, I think it just all stacks up against them. I don't see them getting in.
Yeah, Washington State's a good football team. They can score, obviously, playing better defense. I think they're so far down, it's going to be very hard for them to climb up. I think the Pac-12 at this point just needs complete chaos to have a chance for any of their teams to get back up in there. So for now, I think the Pac-12 is on the outside looking in.
Remember, we had a playoff team in the first playoff rankings, which we'll have next week. Ohio State the first year was 16 in the initial playoff rankings. The following year, Oklahoma was 15 and made it into the top 4, but probably a steeper hill to climb. Not probably, definitely a steeper hill to climb for the Cougars. Now, the Big 12 also might be in a bit of a precarious situation. Texas beat Oklahoma, right? Everybody remember that? Yet, playoff predictor says there's only a 1% chance for the Longhorns, or even West Virginia for that matter, to make the college football playoff. Texas still ranked ahead of Oklahoma, but Kirk, who's the best team in the Big 12?
Well, if you go by that head-to-head matchup that day, Texas proved to be a better team than Oklahoma. But I think we all would say if those teams continue to play, Oklahoma with Kyler Murray, especially with Sam Ehlinger banged up a little bit on that shoulder, you'd have to give Oklahoma probably an edge overall. But we can't wait to see this Oklahoma defense continue to see where it evolves with Ruffin McNeil taking over. I think the reason that you would see Oklahoma ahead is whatever ranking that was or percentages we came up with there. I think that's respect for Oklahoma's potential of what they can be, and those two teams potentially matching up again in a Big 12 championship game. Clearly, they give Texas or they give OU a nod to be able to be the team to come out of the Big 12. Big 12 to me is still, with the rankings the way they are, Big 12 is still in a really good position if they keep winning to have their champion included this year into the playoff.
Yeah, and Herbie, I think right now Texas is a better team than Oklahoma. I just think they're a more complete team across the board. And you referenced Oklahoma's defense. I think Texas on defense is in a better spot right now. When Sam Ehlinger was healthy, he's playing at a really, really high level. And obviously they're hoping to get him back for Oklahoma State this weekend. Of course, they won the head-to-head. And I think, guys, Ruffin McNeil's defense is kind of the big X factor. We know they can score, and Kyler Murray's fantastic. I think the results from TCU this past weekend in his first game as DC was a bit inconsistent. Looked really good in the first quarter, good in the second half. In the second quarter, they give up 2 long explosive plays for touchdowns in consecutive plays. So, you know, the inconsistency has sort of been the MO for this defense for the last several years, and they're obviously going to have a chance to impress us and show us they've improved. They're going to play Texas Tech and Oklahoma State and West Virginia and these high-octane offenses. But I think until, David, I see the defense make a big step forward, I would still say, at least right now, Texas is the best team in the Big 12.
You know, this Sam Ehlinger injury is significant. It's his throwing shoulder. If you watch Texas, they're not a power run team. They are a Sam Ehlinger run team. They're not great up front. I think they're better, like a zone blocking, look like a bunch of basketball players up front, small offensive line. Texas isn't going to go the rest of the way undefeated. Oklahoma's going to win the rest of their games. And Oklahoma obviously could have a chance to possibly play Texas again. I just think Oklahoma with their firepower. Jesse, you're right. They gave up some explosive plays to a new quarterback. I think they obviously, weren't real familiar with too. I think there were some signs this past week that they can get better, and I do. I think their defense will get a little bit better. I'm not saying they're going to be Alabama or LSU or anybody like that, but I think they will take strides to get better. I think Oklahoma's going to be here in the end, and we're going to be talking about them in several weeks, and they're going to be hanging around, and they're going to be fighting for one of those playoff spots.
Texas is the best team in the Big 12. And if you look at defense, David, and you just mentioned they've gotten a little better, I think Oklahoma needs to be able to say, look, we changed defensive coordinators. We have Ruffin McNeil now. They went into a bye week. And I think we all sat back and we wanted to see what they looked like against TCU. And in a game when Oklahoma got up, I believe it was 28-7 at one point, you expect their defense to slam the door shut. TCU makes some plays in the second half. All of a sudden, they get it down to one score. And so I don't come out feeling better about the Oklahoma team, especially on the defensive side of the ball, than I felt before they went into the bye week and they fired Stoops as their defensive coordinator. Today, if Oklahoma was to play Texas once again, Texas is the better football team. They're more complete. You mentioned Ehlinger and his throwing shoulder, but you also said they're a running football team, and Ehlinger likes to run the football. A healthy Ehlinger with the ability to run the ball, still better than Oklahoma. What happens later on as these weeks continue, and they will, and we'll continue to watch this defense, if they get better, then it may shift over to Kyler Murray. But right now, as we look at it, Texas is the better football team.
The better individual pieces, I think, are Oklahoma. The better team up to this point has been Texas. But I will say this, in my opinion, Texas Tech and Lubbock gets both of these teams back-to-back. They'll either get one of them or both of them. Texas Tech's defense with David Gibbs is playing well. They got the freshman quarterback back. They're not a bad team, especially when you have to go there to play them. So both those teams better strap it on and get ready to play Texas Tech.
Now, you got a first-hand look at that Red Raider defense against TCU a couple of weeks back. They're certainly dangerous. Texas has another challenge before that, and it's going to come to Saturday Night Football when they go into the house that T. Boone built. 8 o'clock Eastern time. Longhorns and the Pokes will be wearing Barry Sanders throwback tribute jerseys, streaming live on the ESPN app and on ABC. And still perfect as UCF. What do you think about that? 20 in a row. What about staying perfect and how they should be evaluated? The show. The playoff selection committee, they do listing steps and ranking steps. They have to list groups of 6 teams, the best 6 in any order to start before they begin ranking. How many listing steps, Joey, do you go through before you get to UCF? Basically, are they a top 6 type team, top 12 type team in your mind? Where are they?
I think they get into the second group. I think for sure, as they're undefeated, and we keep looking, and it's interesting to me when you look at UCF. Now, last season they started number 18 in the initial rankings. They made it all the way to number 12. Now they're sitting at number 10 in the AP. And so I know the AP isn't the committee, but when Tuesday rolls around next week, we'll take a look at where UCF is sitting at, and then that'll let us know if they're within striking distance. To me, they would be in the second group of 6, and they would have their opportunity to be compared to those top 4 through 6 teams, Reese. And then once that happens, and that's all they can ask for, that's all anybody that's looking at college football can ask for, is once you get a chance to get compared to those top teams, where do they believe you fall?
I agree with you, Joey. They're in the second 6, but I think we go back last year, too. One of your complaints was they were up there, but every week they continued to be there, and
yes,
people continued to pass them up. So I don't think this next week is an indication of what Central Florida should be. But I think with all the losses that we've already had, with more losses to come, if you start talking about 2 lost teams, I think that's when you start comparing UCF's undefeated record. I'm perfectly fine with a really good team that played a hard schedule with 2 losses, and UCF, that being a thorough debate. I mean, if you think about Penn State, and if they ran the table and they beat a good Michigan team, and some of the wins that they have now, which App State, by the way, if you want to start talking about, is a really good team, not mentioned in those same groups with North Dakota State and UCF and Fresno State and them. So I think it matters, it matters where they're at, but I think it'll be more of a 2-loss situation as opposed to 1-loss teams.
And David, to that point, in the strength of record metric right now, they're already behind 2 lost teams.
Yep.
Texas A&M and Washington already behind 2, Jesse.
Yeah, that's a good point, guys. You know, to me, I think a lot about last year's UCF team. I don't think this year's team, from an eye test standpoint, is as good as last year. And obviously, it's a whole new season. It's a whole new team. There's a different head coach. Watching them play this year, I don't think their defense is as strong as it was a year ago. You guys will remember, they had a lot of NFL talent. They had a first-round corner. They had Griffin playing linebacker. They had a third-round receiver, a third-round tight end. And I think, too, just from a resume standpoint, to me, it's just hard to know how good they really are based on who they played. Reese, you just mentioned it. I think the best record, the best team they played so far, Memphis at 4-4, and certainly they beat Pittsburgh, and they beat them a lot more convincingly than Notre Dame did. I think that's probably the best argument that UCF could make at this point right now, and it's one thing certainly that the committee would have to consider. UCF's schedule is backloaded. We know that. If they're going to make a move in these rankings, it'll start next week. It's going to have to probably come later in the year when they play Temple and Cincinnati and USF and maybe Houston in the American Championship game. But for me right now, I do have UCF a little bit further back. I've got them probably around 14. The only one-loss team I've got them ranked ahead of is West Virginia.
And that probably has everything to do with resume at this point, I would assume. Jesse, for me, I look at the quarterback, Mackenzie Milton, who was the guy last year. He's doing it again this year. He's an X factor on this team. I think a big part of the reason that they're as good as they are is because of his way of running this system. And Josh Heupel, in just his first year, has taken over for Scott Frost. There's a lot of good to like about this team. But I think that sometimes when we want to talk about the group of five and fighting for the little guy, it's not just UCF. Like, there are other teams that are out there that deserve just as much of attention as UCF. I think it's because they're on this 20-game run and their fans are so loud about this that they seem to get most of the attention. But there's a team out west right now, guys, in Fresno State with Jeff Tedford, that's ahead of them in every ranking you want to look at, whether it's the Sagarin rankings or offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency. They went on the road twice to play Power 5 teams. They lost late in a game against Minnesota on the road. So, I know UCF is the easy team to pick. David touched on Appalachian State. They're up there pretty high. So you got App State, you got Fresno State. And I wonder, because we talk so much about UCF, is there a West Coast bias towards not just the Pac-12? Is there a West Coast bias towards Fresno State and teams out there? Nobody outside of people who really follow college football have any idea about Fresno State, have any idea about Jeff Tedford and the job that he's done coming back to college football, and yet they're ahead of UCF in every single ranking. Why aren't we talking about Fresno State? Why is it just about UCF when it comes to the little guy? I'm all for the little guy, but it's not just about UCF.
Well, the reason is because of the zero in the loss column. And let's be honest about this. Here's the deal for UCF. You're either talking about them being in the top 4, or to Kirk's point, stay ahead of the other guys in the group of 5 and make sure you get your shot in a Year 6 bowl. And I don't think that any of us right now have them in that group that will be measured against a group that would be contending to get into the 4
Can I offer
playoff
something
spots.
while we're talking about UCF? It's because Danny White, the AD, threw a parade and proclaimed themselves national champions last year. And it's true. Genius idea. A lot of people ridiculed them for that, but that's a big reason why we talk about UCF right now.
And they beat Auburn.
Yeah,
Don't forget Auburn.
And they did, right. And lots more to talk about that as we go. We'll see how it goes. We're going to give some advice to the committee as they are 1 week away from releasing their rankings.
Chick-fil-A Nuggets. Tonight is Nugget Night.
We crushed our producer, Aaron, by not shutting up. So quick advice for the committee. Listen to everything we've said up to this point, and good luck.